There are countless moments in history where things could have taken a far more dramatic, or frankly more interesting, turn. One of those moments came in 1917, when former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt was finally given permission to raise a small volunteer force to fight in France during World War I. Roosevelt was ready. His men were ready. Even some of his French allies welcomed him. And legally, the U.S. government had passed legislation that seemed to open the door for exactly this kind of mission. But Roosevelt never went. So the question is simple. Why was Teddy Roosevelt kept from the battlefield? To understand that, you have to understand who Roosevelt was. He wasn't an ordinary politician with military fantasies. In the 1890s, he served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President William McKinley. But when the Spanish-American War broke out, he resigned his position and personally went to fight. He quickly became a national hero after leading the Rough Riders and earning fame at battles like San Juan Hill. When the war ended, he returned home celebrated, and his political rise accelerated. He became governor of New York almost immediately. His popularity grew so rapidly that it began to worry President McKinley. Rather than risk a political rivalry, McKinley brought Roosevelt into the 1900 election as his vice president, an attempt to both harness and contain his influence. It worked. They won. But fate intervened. McKinley was assassinated, and Roosevelt became president of the United States. During his presidency, he proved to be one of the most energetic and popular leaders in American history. However, he pledged not to seek more than 2 terms. After stepping down, he was succeeded by William Howard Taft, once a close ally. That friendship didn't last. Roosevelt became deeply disappointed in Taft's leadership, believing he was too cautious and ineffective. In 1912, Roosevelt returned to politics in an extraordinary comeback attempt, even running as a third-party candidate. He didn't win, but he split the vote, effectively handing the presidency to Woodrow Wilson. And that is where things began to matter again for World War I. When war broke out in Europe in 1914, Wilson's administration committed to neutrality. The United States would trade with both sides and avoid direct involvement, hoping to stay out of the conflict entirely. Roosevelt strongly disagreed. To him, neutrality was not wisdom, it was weakness. He believed the United States should actively shape the post-war world, not sit on the sidelines while it was decided by others. He publicly condemned Germany's actions, especially its invasion of Belgium, and criticized Wilson for not taking a stronger stance. Over time, his criticism became personal and political. He questioned Wilson's leadership, his judgment, even his patriotism. When the 1916 election approached, Roosevelt supported Wilson's opponents, hoping to remove him from power. But Wilson won again. Then came a turning point. The Zimmermann telegram and escalating German submarine attacks pushed the United States toward war. In 1917, America finally entered World War I. Roosevelt saw his opportunity. He proposed raising a volunteer division to lead American forces in France. He offered to serve at the front, alongside his own men. Now, this was no symbolic gesture. Despite being 58 years old, physically weakened, often ill, and blind in one eye, Roosevelt was serious. He believed his presence would inspire troops, strengthen Allied morale, and give meaning to his life's ideals. Even so, his request shocked Washington. The idea of a former president leading troops in combat raised immediate concerns. No one was quite sure where he would fit in the military chain of command. Generals would have to report to a man who once commanded the entire nation, and one known for doing things his own way. And then there was morale. Many believed Roosevelt's presence would boost American and Allied spirits enormously. But if he were killed, it could have the opposite effect, becoming a propaganda victory for Germany. Others feared something more practical. Modern warfare had changed. The trenches, machine guns, and chemical weapons of World War I were not the wars Roosevelt had once fought. Some officials worried his experience was outdated, and that his volunteers might suffer unnecessary losses. Roosevelt rejected those concerns outright. He insisted his men would be trained for modern combat, including gas warfare, and argued that he was still fit to lead from the front. But the biggest obstacle wasn't military, it was political. President Wilson held the final authority, and Wilson had multiple reasons to say no. First, Roosevelt remained a powerful political figure. If he went to war and became a hero, or worse, a martyr, it could reshape American politics overnight. Second, if Roosevelt died, Wilson would be blamed for sending a former president into a deadly war zone. And third, if Roosevelt succeeded too dramatically, he would return as a national legend, far more popular than before, and a serious threat to any future political balance. Wilson also worried about division within the army, volunteers loyal to Roosevelt versus drafted soldiers serving out of duty. That kind of split, he feared, could damage unity. And beneath all of it was something simpler: personal distrust and political rivalry. So Wilson refused. And that decision was final. Roosevelt never got his command. Instead, he redirected his energy into criticism, attacking Wilson's leadership throughout the war and pushing for a harsher peace settlement. He opposed Wilson's vision for a League of Nations, arguing instead for a stronger international alliance capable of enforcing peace through military power if necessary. But the world was not ready for that vision. By 1918, Roosevelt's health declined sharply. The war had taken its toll on his family as well. His sons were wounded, and one was killed in action. Roosevelt himself never recovered. He died in January 1919, just months after the war ended. And with him died the possibility of one of the most unusual wartime chapters in American history, a former president leading troops on the front lines of World War I. In the end, perhaps it was inevitable, or perhaps history simply chose the less chaotic version of events. Either way, the story of Teddy Roosevelt and World War I remains one of history's most fascinating what-ifs. The next video is even more shocking. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.